afternoon, and we are going to be hopefully having a much more frequent and structured interaction with yourselves in connection with the issue that's at the top of the nation's mind, the top of the media agenda, top of things that you're interested in sharing with our public, namely the energy crisis, and above all, the progress or not around the energy action plan. So firstly, thank you very much for joining. My name is Michael Curran. There are some of the folks out there that I'm still to meet. Some of you were with us in Cape Town yesterday in the postcab. I am going to be the acting government spokesperson for a period until we fill the big shoes of Sis Pumla, and also then the acting DG of GCIS. I am going to just share one or two issues with you. Someone just help Mr. Dix join the line. Firstly, we do apologize that there have been some gaps in terms of the time flow around giving you feedback and that. It's been very difficult to coordinate a number of moving parts, but colleagues in the media, it's my ambition that we will initiate and institutionalize a weekly briefing. It won't always be a media briefing, but we're going to call it a weekly update, so that you'll know that on a certain day in the week, either Thursday or Friday, there's going to be a definite set of feedback for yourselves and an opportunity to pose any questions that you might have. And we really are grateful, because we do know this is the biggest thing, that if we can get this right, there are so many other areas of our work that are going to be able to take our country forward. You know, our economy, hospitality, you name it. It's going to be a different South Africa. So thank you very much. The technical briefing today, I'll facilitate it as the program director. And I'm very delighted that I'm joined by two of my esteemed presenters. I've invited or asked Thomas Conradi, who you've had an opportunity to interact with before, from Eskom, and he's at the helm of generation recovery and things along those lines. And secondly, Rudy Dix. Welcome to you, Mr. Rudy Dix, as well as Thomas. Rudy, I'm sure you all know, has got quite a big thing on his plate as the project lead for us on the NECOM initiative. And basically, he's our leading team lead on the issue of the energy action plan. So today, we're not going to do a lengthy statement or anything along those lines. We're just going to allow both colleagues who are speaking, Thomas and Rudy, to give us a bit of an update where we've been since last week. I'm also joined by colleagues, Ntato Mnyuku, who you may know as my counterpoint at Eskom, and the very well-known Sikonati, the spokesperson of Eskom. So, and we'll help field questions that perhaps fall in our area of work. So without further ado, so just a sense is, please feel free to type your questions in the chat. I don't know, Peli, if we're gonna, because we are not a huge group, but you could actually perhaps, if there's an opportunity to allow folks to raise their hand and then to pose a verbal question, which will be fine. Alternatively, you'll just type a chat. But as I say, it's more of a platform for conversation. So without further ado, Thomas, how was the week? What happened this week? How do the grand dams look? Some of the coal? Did we have any problems? Did we have any successes? And what are we anticipating in the week ahead? So if I can just ask you, Mr. Conradi, if you could come in and just give us a little bit of a taste, please. Over to you. And colleagues, I'm going to take my camera off because we have a bit of a bandwidth challenge because there's another event on here. So over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. If someone can just give me a thumbs up on that I'm audible. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You perfectly, Thomas, perfectly.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for the opportunity to also have this address. Yeah, we've been having a busy week also, and having had very heavy rains that we've experienced also, especially towards the east, impacting our power stations towards the east of Mpumalanga. but even a year around the Vaal also. We have through the years have been also working on improving our what we refer to as rain readiness to ensure that we can best deal with the wet situation. Normally that helps us well in having adequate coal reserves also for shorter spells of very heavy rains, whereas this long spell, then all your dry and seasoned piles become also wet in the process. Yet we are doing fairly well in terms of managing the situation. It did, however, cause us to see some increases in what we refer to as partial load losses, where generating units are on load, but we need to run them at lower loads to either deal with coal constraints in terms of feeding the coal in, or due to the wetness of the coal that also takes away some of the energy out of the coal, and that we need to run at some part load. Given that we have seen still that our total unplanned unavailability is hovering around quite high 17,000 megawatts. So that hints that we are still forced to continue applying stage 3 load shedding during daytimes, and then also escalate towards the stage 4 load shedding over the evening peak from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till then 5 o'clock the next morning. So all in all, we've had a number of units that has returned also to service, and we're also planning still today to return Duva 2, who's been off for a considerable time of period due to a forced outage, and also Letabo 4, which come back from an outage that we intend to return. That will also give some relief. But the situation is such that we've been dispatching diesel quite hard over this past week also, and equally also using our pump storage, although the pump storage looking more healthy than what we have seen them before as we approach the weekend. Yet we are forced to continue also applying the stage 3 and 4 load shedding over this weekend in the same pattern than what we have done it up till now. And the reason for that is also that we need to rebuild our reserves, but also on a couple of stations, and particularly in Letabo's case, where we need to recover some of our coal stock levels after the very heavy rains, and also a plant problem on one of the conveyor belts. So with that in mind, we will need to be forced to continue applying the stage 3 and 4 load shedding into this weekend, and currently also projected for Monday, where we, as normal, will see a marked increase in demand as we approach the new week. In terms of the diesel reserves, we've got adequate offsite storage and offsite diesel available at Ankerlig and also at Gerikwa, where we are currently busy offloading also a shipment of diesel that has arrived. But our on-site diesel levels are a bit low, so we need to also utilize this opportunity over the weekend to transfer diesel from the off-site storage to the on-site storage in order to be well set up for the coming week. In terms of the longer-term planning, we are still running with significant number of units at risk. Currently, we've had in the order of about 4,700 megawatts of plant running with risk, meaning that they can at any stage let us down, and that's unfortunately the levels of unreliability and unpredictability that we are currently sitting with. We foresee that we will have unit returning also tomorrow, and we're planning for Indrina 10 to return tomorrow, and then further 2 units on Sunday, and further 4 to pick up for Monday's higher demand. In the coming weeks and also into March, there are a number of units that need to return from planned and forced outages. So we're aiming to return an order of about 7 generating units of different sizes over the next couple of weeks, and then also into March, another 3 that we intend to return to service. And that is also as we need to increase our capacity and also to bring units back from outage. We still very much in the outage season, so a lot of work being done on units, and this will continue also right through March. In fact, we will even see a slight increase in plant maintenance to the latter part of March, as we in the thick things of the outage period. Also to have all the machines in the best possible condition as we approach the winter months. So, Michael, that's where we stand currently in terms of the system. We are not where we want to be yet in terms of getting our total unavailability down. The 17,000 is just too high. Also, that being aggravated by the fact that we've got in that number also the 2,160 megawatts from Kusile 1, 2, and 3 that are off as a result of the flue duct failure that we've experienced. The project is progressing there in terms of also getting to the point of having those temporary stacks that we need to construct there for units 1, 2, and 3, and also in close engagements with the Department of Environmental, the Forestry and Fishery and Environmental, in order to get exemption that we can in fact build the temporary stacks. That is progressing well, and we have also started with the manufacturing processes in terms of the stacks. Michael, let me leave it there, and then we can deal with questions later on. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you very much. I think that came out loud and clear. If you could just clip off there so I can invite the next gentleman along. Thank you very much. Members of the media, just so that I can reinforce one thing, some of you did join a little later. And also I see I've had a preliminary process question from Chris Yelland, which I thought would be useful for everybody. So we want to be a bit agile, because you guys need, as the media, you need that place where we can interact and you can have that opportunity to engage with the details. So it's not cast in stone. I'm using the word weekly update. There will still be times when there will be an IMC briefing. There will still be times when Eskom might think it's necessary to have a very specific technical briefing. But what I want to do here, colleagues from the media, is what I hear from all of you that we need is just a regular, consistent 1-hour opportunity to get that sense of updates. Obviously, within the week, you'll still do your own work and questions and things, but it's going to be a clearinghouse, I hope. So I don't want to just say, yes, it's going to be replacing, because we'll just see how the need looks, On a given week, for example, say there isn't really something too hot. We might issue a statement, or we might just do 1 or 2 main interviews with myself, or something along those lines. So please, colleagues, it's not cast in stone. I'd be very grateful to hear from yourselves if there's any thoughts, but it's really just wanting to create a channel so that we don't have that deficit. And I mean, in all honesty, I think we are feeling a lot more pace. The center is holding a lot stronger, and obviously you heard the center is going to be reinforced during the State of the Nation address. But we do want you to know that it's because we regard the media as a critical partner. The roles you did, for example, on a Friday morning with Minister Zweli Mkhize, Minister Mamloko Kubai, and then when Dr. Joe Pahla was permanently appointed there, really were instrumental in helping South Africa change the curve around our COVID and our vaccination issue, which now is often getting compliments from colleagues all over the world. So that's it. And that being said, obviously, the big plan, the Energy Action Plan, is probably what we'd hear if there were any exciting developments this week, where we are. And without further ado, then I'd like to invite my colleague Rudy Dix. Rudy, if you could then just give us a taste of the week that was, where we are. Was there any action lab activity, anything that's exciting like that, anything you want to touch on? And then after that, we'll give it an opportunity to members of the media. Rudy, over to you, please, sir.
Thanks, Michael. Just allow me to put on, I can't put on my camera so that people see it is actually me.
Kelly, would you please allow Mr. Dix's camera? She didn't want me earlier, members of the media, because she claimed that I wasn't good looking enough. So I suspect
Rudy, you should be sorted now.
I think she may do the same to me also. Oh, wonderful, yes, because I'm not good looking. The hair needs to
there
be
you
cut.
go, Mr. Dix.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Karin, and thanks, Thomas, also for that update. I thought that not to go through the NECOM plan again. I think that has been emphasized quite a bit, and I think the State of the Nation of the President had laid the basis for quite an important and important set of interventions that will allow us to, expedite and move with a great amount of speed to be able to do a lot of the outstanding areas that are there. I thought it's perhaps just important to give a quick update. There are about 5 or 6 areas that I think are important for us to be able to talk through. The first, as you know, on the RFP for the battery storage, that was a commitment that we'd given off to sign on specifically those deviations or exemptions that were required. That has now been finalized. All those approvals have been done. The battery storage, in terms of our conversation with the IPP office, means that the RFP will go out by the end of February. This is the commitment that we have thus far with the leadership and the management at the IPP office, and I think that's positive and good news. We've been trying to get this out as early as last year. This has now finally come to a point where that will be issued, and we expect quite a positive market response to that RFP. I must also just say, in the last few weeks as well, actually in the last week, Eskom has received approval to be exempted from the new gen regulations, and that of course allows them to do quite a bit of emergency procurement and a number of other interventions, and this is an important step. Again, the Minister of DMRE allowing for that exemption from the new gen regulations that are there. Some of the more critical progresses that have also been made. For instance, we have now we've asked the Eskom colleagues from generation to give us a sense of what's happened with the standard offer and the emergency procurement. I'm pleased to say that there's been quite an interest from the market for either ones of the programs. Of course, they're definitely designed. We now have an indication of close to 400 megawatts of the initial response. These conversations are in contracting stages, so at least the first kind of call and market response has been fairly positive. Again, this will pick up. We know it will pick up, but for now, Eskom is in the process of potentially finalizing up to about 400 megawatts through both the standard offer purchase and the emergency purchase, and I think that's been a fairly positive outcome, if I may say that right now. The colleagues may have also just seen, quite an important step around the. Let's leave that one first. Let me leave that one for last, because that's more about the reform of the entity. I thought there were quite a couple of other interesting announcements, perhaps, that was made by the president in SONA, and I think this has taken us into a big leap around small-scale embedded generation, SSEG as it refers to, and particularly the potential announcements that the Minister of Finance would make in the budget speech. But I think there's a fair commitment around wanting to support rooftop PV and solar, rooftop PV solar, and providing some degree of fiscal support. And of course, the president had provided that announcement and given the guidance that this is quite an important area. We don't have to be sold on this in any particular way. We know that this is one of the quickest ways to try and ensure that we get, both households and businesses off the grid or partially off the grid to be able to alleviate, and that's going to be an important part of it. You, of course, know the success of that is depending on whether there is either incentives or subsidies or any form of fiscal support that's there. We know that the Minister, and I don't want to provide and preempt the budget speech, but it's important that we know that the Minister of Finance will provide a sense of specific sets of programs in that regard. The one thing that I think it's important is, you would recall during COVID, we had this loan guarantee that morphed into what is referred to now as a bounce back scheme. And it was really, a first loss kind of scheme to the amount of 20 billion rand, provided, the kind of guarantee that the Treasury would give towards banks to support SMMEs during COVID, and of course during the economic recovery post-COVID. There's been quite an interesting conversation around whether one could, look at changing the bounce back scheme into something that could support both households and businesses, small businesses, in a manner to invest into rooftop solar and rooftop solar PV. The conversations, of course, is whether one pays, for the capex and the installation, I think there's particular sets of views around whether one pays for that or that, including whether resources will be made available for a feed-in. Again, this is the decision that the tax policy guys at National Treasury will make, and of course the Minister, as indicated in SONA, will make further announcements and pronouncements on that. I think that's quite critical also. This week coming, we will see quite a bit of work done on the one-stop shop for the energy, and particularly the first phase of launching this and creating a one-stop entity, a one-stop, right, for all applications around generation projects, and this is going to be quite critical. We started this work last year already. We were able to streamline, reduce, or eliminate many of the red tape. This is moving pretty fast and well. This is a partnership with the private sector, and we brought in the World Bank also to support us, building on the one-stop shop principle that has already been there, and so we're seeing that going forward. In this week also coming, we're hoping to see potentially a much significant engagement on two key frameworks that we'll engage with NERSA on, and particularly to make that frameworks available for public comment. This relates to the SSEG component, which is the net billing framework, and colleagues here will recall that when we had the action lab, we had finalized the draft, and of course, this has gone through different stakeholders and to different members of the communities that are out there. That's also going to be linked to a continuation and the finalization of a feed-in tariff proposed methodology, and that again, that I don't want to preempt that may be something that the National Treasury would have to announce. And then the last part is, of course, the wheeling framework. Again, having brought in many colleagues, some of you here who are experts into developing a wheeling framework that also would require NERSA to put out for public comment, but all three of these would provide significant guidelines to distributors out there, both Eskom and municipal distributors, around options to support them in getting off households and businesses off the grid. And again, that's linked to what potentially National Treasury would pronounce. The last point, if I may just, Michael, is some significant progress on the reform program of Eskom. And many of you would have seen too that that is moving ahead, particularly on the establishment or the operationalization of the National Transmission Company. Its operation is dependent on getting a license or licenses, depending on the different aspects of its functions and powers. That has now gotten the nod from NERSA to publish those license applications for public comment over the next 30 days. And that's important for us because our time frame for the finalization and the issuing of the license and the operationalization of the transmission company is the 31st of March. So I think that's a bit of a good news also, that we have seen we're moving on a whole set of different fronts in that respect. Mike, so I think that's where we're at. And as is, we are moving at great speed to implement much of what is in the action plan to support Eskom on getting as much support as possible for its generation recovery plan, making sure that we stick with the reform program and getting additional megawatts onto the grid as quickly and as much as possible, and supporting private sector investment. Thanks.
Mr. Dix, thank you very much for that input. Highly appreciated. While I just ask our technical crew, Carol's alerted me to the fact that the chat seems to be blocked there, Peliswa. Can you and the team look at that? And also, I will take a few hands. Just while I do that, I just want to do a bit of a promo as well and really make an appeal. I told you earlier, members of the media, that on Valentine's Day, I don't know if it was important to be on Tuesday or not, but you have seen the Power Alert campaign. And my colleague Ntato here and Sikonati, they launched on Tuesday on a digital platforms. So on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitters, etc. So that Power Alert issue, as much as we are on load shedding and that, there's a lot of non-essential things that we do often that actually then deprive us. And we're trying to chase the goal of saving maybe 1,000 megawatts through this thing. And if we can really ask members of the media to partner with us around that, non-essential means that we could actually almost be on one level lower of load shedding all the time. So please keep an eye out for that. And Tato might have an opportunity later to comment on that. But this Power Alert system is now on TV. It's across other digital platforms. Please, if members of the media could assist us with that, it would be a very significant contribution. Right, that being said, gentlemen on the panel, thank you very much. Carol, I hope that the chat is enabled now, but I've got, here we go. So I'll field one question at the end, but in the meantime, I'm going to give the team. So Chris is asking EE Business Intelligence, that's where you belong. Okay, Chris, I've covered the weekly briefing thing. Thomas, for yourself, please advise if Kusile 1 is on track. Is it going well? Is it on time? Terence wants to know about the DFFE process to consider Eskom's application for the exemption at Kusile, which we know about, and the rebuilding of the flues. When will that decision be made? What is Eskom doing in the meantime? What contingency is in place to if the decision is challenged in the court? So Thomas, you can probably give a go at that, but Terence, perhaps if we can't get enough substance on that, and Rudy might add, maybe for the next round, I'll ensure that we invite someone from DFFE to look at the range of areas that cover them as well. Chris Yelland is saying, please advise whether the 4 billion rand, and Thomas, I think this is on your side, is being sought by Eskom for from commercial banks for diesel. You know the story. Has it been, in 2023 indeed, has been 100% secured, or negotiations still underway? What further funding, and is there rand value to this, will be required before the end of the financial year? Is it 100% secured, or are we still on the journey? So I think we all know what the substance is there. And then William Horn from Network 24. Will the government delay any interventions it wishes to make in light of the state of disaster, since there are 3 legal challenges to the state of disaster that have now been filed? Legal teams from Outer have indicated that government would be unwise to implement any interventions until the urgent court case is heard. Do you agree that this will be done? I will field that question. And Mr. Dix, if you have any view, you can top me up. Norman Moyo from Distributed Power Africa. Is there progress on fast-tracking wheeling by municipalities? So Norman, I think Rudy was alluding to that, but he might re-emphasize. Denise Smuts from Business Day says, questions for Thomas. Thomas, how many megawatts are planned for outage in the Eskom sitting at now? And will it peak in March? With the 10 units, if she counted correctly, that will be brought back from outage over the next few weeks, how many megawatts will this add to the grid? What has been the average EAF so far for February? And what progress has been made to get to our 60% we're going for by March? So what I'm going to then do, I think those are quite straightforward. I'm going to ask Carol, try and unmute, because at your hand, William Horn. If you're repeating and you covered in the chat, Carol and William, then please drop. But I'm going to give Mr. Christian Duplessis. Try your mic, Christian, and see if you can get hold, if your voice can be heard. Please proceed, Christian Duplessis, and I don't know where you are from, so you'll introduce yourself, please. Christian?
Hi, sir. This is Christian Duplessis from Netwerk 24 speaking. So I would just like to... can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, so my first question, perhaps to Mr. Rudy Dix, would be whether he has any knowledge about when the regulations for the National State of Disaster will be published, and how this process is unfolding, like what is happening behind the scenes to publish these regulations. And also, how is the National State of Disaster going to influence this plan? Because obviously you did a lot of planning, but how is this going to change everything? And then, yeah, that would be my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And Carol, let's hear from you, please. Carol, are you winning? Yeah.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me? Because I have been unmuted, I think.
Carol, we hear you perfectly, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Just to elaborate on that diesel question, how much diesel is Eskom burning, sort of, you know, monthly or weekly or whatever? What's the story, and how are you funding that? And then just if Rudy could elaborate on this emergency procurement that Eskom is going to do. In the NECOM plan, it talks about this emergency procurement. So is this emergency procurement now just going to be done by Eskom? And what sort of, is it sort of agnostic technology, or what's the outline? What's the plan for that emergency procurement? Thanks.
Thank you, Carol, very kindly. And then finally for this round, there's another one, Rudy, I think this could be for yourself, from Deneen Erasmus. What is the status of electricity to be procured from the pool, the Southern African countries, the issue that's on the grid, on our action plan as well? So please, if I could request Thomas, if you could kick the ball off, and I will probably give us, seeing as we're looking okay for time, I might give an opportunity for a second round, but let's give Thomas the field. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me kick off with a question that came from Mr. Chris Yeyland and also from Mr. Terence Kremer regarding the Kusile situation. Firstly, we're working on the Kusile units 1, 2, and 3 in parallel, because effectively they require all three the same temporary solution in terms of the construction of flues. We will obviously look at where there is a resource constraint or any constraint in any matter of how we can prioritize to bring a unit before the others. So where we find ourselves currently in terms of the engagements that we've had with DFFE, and we're still busy with that to see how we can best also effect in terms of ensuring duty of care. The most probable way that we will need to deal with it is to apply for a variation to our existing license in order to get a temporary postponement of the components to the MES, particularly also in terms of the emission of the fact that we want to bypass the flue gas desulfurization plant whilst we're constructing the temporary stack, but also in terms of the actual temporary stack, the construction thereof, the height thereof, in order to ensure that there's proper dispersion of the flue. So we have formally submitted the application also to DFFE, and we are in negotiations with them and discussions currently. It is not delaying the process because there is in any case a considerable amount of construction that needs to happen in terms of manufacturing of the steel components, the ducting and the flue and the temporary stacks, which we can do in parallel. So it's not impacting the program in terms of finalizing the engagements with DFFE on the exemption that is required. If I can then also deal with some of the other questions in terms of the question from Mr. Yayland regarding the funding. So currently we've got funding secured and available for the remainder of February. And as I've indicated, we've also got adequate stock currently available. In terms of the funding for March, we're still in discussion with National Treasury and with lenders also in terms of how to secure that funding. So that is still a work in progress that we need to conclude there. If I just page down also, let me just see the other questions. Oh yes, the megawatts returning. So currently, what we do have in terms of planned maintenance, as we stand currently, is we're sitting at 4,251 megawatts that is on planned maintenance, and that equates to about just below 9%, or just over 9%. Sorry, PCLF or planned maintenance capability that we've lost 9.2%. In fact, as we approach later this year, that will increase a bit towards the end of March. We anticipate that we will go to the order of about 13%, 12.5% towards the end of the month, which will equate to about 5,760 megawatts that will be in planned maintenance. In terms of the EAF, we are currently at about 53% EAF, 53.88% to be exact. We anticipate that we will then return these units that will bring back some additional megawatts, but we unfortunately also need to, from that then, have this higher PCLF plant maintenance that will take some megawatts away. So that is the situation that we find ourselves currently. To achieve 60% by end of March is going to be very difficult, and we will keep on driving to bring our total unplanned losses down to the order of about 13,500 in order for us to achieve the 60%. What made it very difficult for us is that obviously with the Kusile 1, 2, and 3 taking the 2,160 megawatts out, we originally have planned on returning units 2 and 3 earlier, but then subsequently, meaning the beginning of April, but then subsequently as we realized earlier in January, the extent of damage and the work that needs to be done on all 3 ducts, that will not realize. So unfortunately, we will not be able to salvage that 2 units, 1,400 megawatts on Kusiles 2 and 3. I think I've dealt with most of the questions. Let me see what else.
Thomas, just one quick one. Sorry,
yes.
It was my fault. I didn't see it. It's your, before we hand to Rudy from Yeland. Please advise progress on Kusile Unit 1. Was it Kusile you asked about?
Yeah.
Kuberg. Chris, you wrote Kuberg. So you wrote Kusile. I didn't see a Kuberg one, but let's hear about Kuberg as well while you're on the floor, please, Chris. Thomas.
Okay. In terms of the Kusile Unit 1 outage, it's progressing well. They are on schedule, and work is very closely monitored there by the project team also. And there's no reason at this stage. Yes, there was some cases that they've had to just to deal also with some COVID cases that they've picked up, but not impacting the program as such. So it's all systems going, and the outage execution is progressing well on Koeberg Unit 1. Thank you,
very much,
Michael.
Perfect. Right, Rudy, over to you, sir, please.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Perfectly, thank you.
Wonderful. So you'll answer on the court cases, but I mean, I think the point here is that, you know, whether there's court cases or not, we have an energy action plan that has been announced, and we're in the process of implementing that energy action plan. That's not dependent on, you know, whether parties are taking us to court relevant to a state of disaster or anything else. We will continue to proceed as we have done right now, and as we make progress. I think it would be slightly, you know, mischievous if we have to stop because there are pending court cases related to a state of disaster. We have an energy problem to resolve, and you know, we have to fully implement the energy action plan, and that's precisely what we're doing right now. The wheeling framework, I mean, you can fast track it. I mean, here's the challenge with those three things that I spoke about, which is the net billing framework, and you know, the technical explanations that we can go into detail around that, the feeding methodology, which is linked to that, and then the wheeling framework, which is dispatching your energy across the distribution network, right, from a point where you produce it to a point where it's been used, where there's an off-taker. I mean, all of this relies on providing an adequate framework, and I think that's where our responsibility is, right? The second part of that is to ensure that you know, we can promote this amongst distributors, for example, having a conversation with the metro councils, for example, who are distributors also. Eskom, that controls about 30% of the distribution network, of course, and they've been quite eager. So what we need to do as quickly as possible is put out a framework and guidelines around how distributors are able to develop themselves, because remember, they have autonomy in terms of the constitution to adopt any forms of policy, but guidelines on that is going to be quite critical, so that of course they you know, they are able to deal with the issues around you know, technical expertise, you know, issues around skills, issues around commercial viability, cost, and a whole different sense of things. So we want to push that, and we're looking at that as a matter of urgency. Yeah, I think the issue on the state of disaster, it will be announced, and as soon as you know, we will know. So those regulations are being finalized with the relevant departments, driven by the Minister of Cogta, and I think that's all that we want to say by now. And how is it going to influence the plan? I think it's important to understand, again, the argument about, and the president has succinctly said why this is important. We want to have a clear line of sight. We want to make sure that we deal with this expeditiously. We want to make sure that we deal with some of the cumbersome red tape. We want to make sure that everybody is mobilized around the implementation of the energy action plan, and the state of disaster is intended to provide that leeway so that we are able to ensure implementation, and that is across you know, national government, across the entities and that are important for this, like Eskom, for example, like NERSA, SALGA, for instance, across municipalities that require to be able to support their aspects of what the energy action plan is there. Carol, yeah, you're right. So it is Eskom's application for exemption from emergency procurement, and that's been granted by the minister in terms of the new generation regulations under the Electricity Regulatory Act. So it's for Eskom, and I think that's quite important to just know that. And again, it is of course agnostics. That's the thing, but it's a function of how quick we can get megawatts onto the grid, what source of energy it is, again, and whether you have the infrastructure or the mechanisms to do that as quickly as possible. And of course, cost, right? But cost should be least, in my view. I mean, again, Eskom would have to make decisions on the basis of whether it can recover that cost, because that's going to be an important point going forward, right? So if it is able to recover the cost and its engagements with NERSA, that's going to be important. But emergency procurement is precisely to give Eskom the ability to procure that. It doesn't prevent the IPP office, for example, or the minister, or DMRE to issue more RFPs for emergency procurement. It of course has to finalize the risk mitigation program. Those are still outstanding areas that require for them to be able to finalize, and that's ongoing, as you very well know. But this is the power for Eskom to be able to do that as a matter of urgency. So absolutely, I think that's it. In the Southern African Power Pool, thus far, by the end of October last year, we've been able to secure 300 megawatts for the Southern African Power Pool, and that's important. What is happening right now is that the Eskom leadership is negotiating with Southern African countries who are members of the Southern African Power Pool, right? And these are negotiations and conversations that have been held with Botswana, with Mozambican government, and with the Zambian government, specifically because there are potential spare megawatts on their system that we could dispatch through the through the transmission network, right? That of course we support. So that potential there is between 1,300 additional 1,300, but again, that's the maximum. We've been saying that for example, on the Zambian side, there are reduced water levels, and that may have impact on the Cahora Bassa, where we would procure some of those additional megawatts. These conversations are contractual conversations that are currently happening with these governments. And as soon as these contractual negotiations have been finalized, and if there are agreements on those additional megawatts from these three countries, then Eskom will provide information around that. Right now, Eskom has been able to secure 300 megawatts from the Southern African Power Pool thus far. Thanks.
Thank you, Rudy. William, from the government spokesperson point of view, and Rudy touched on it, let's cross that bridge when we get to it. Governments acted within a law. There's a national state of disaster management legislation that gives us the mandate to do things with agility and to do things in the best interest of our country. We've proven that. We've proven the mettle of that in a number of instances. So we will, as we did with various other legal challenges that happened in other phases of our recent history, we'll cross that bench when we get to it. But for now, we have the urgent energy action plan that is the top order of government's business, and the aggressive implementation of that plan is what we are about now. There's another one. Thomas, I don't know if you did mention on Kuiberg 1 and on Medupi 4, okay? In case you missed that, Thomas, just check. There was a question on how we're doing on the fix-up at Kuiberg 1 and on Medupi 4. And then, Rudy, there's one other one here, a last-ish one. Terence has asked one. Terence, I hope I'm understanding it well. I'm not an expert on energy, but the breakdown of the 400 megawatts between the standard offer and the emergency procurement. Okay, so Terence just wants to know about that, under which scheme the emergency purchases will be bought. And then it's a little bit of elaboration, Rudy, but I'm not sure, Terence, we can get to that level of granular detail this week. How could the bounce back scheme be repurposed to enable households to buy the solar system, as Rudy mentioned? And would the full 220 billion guarantee be available to the banks, or has the envelope been reduced by the COVID loans? So basically, it's a case of, okay, so where are we now with the kitty? So Rudy, you probably want to try and give them a bite. Terence, I must be honest with you, that might be something that I could go and find that from the other relevant colleagues if needed, but that's a very useful observation. But anyway, Thomas, let's wrap up from Eskom. And colleagues, I'm closing it for now. There's nothing else here in my group, but Kuiberg and Kusile, Chris, and that one for you, Rudy, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I omitted to answer the question. I think it came from the space and regarding the burn, what we typically burn in terms of diesel at the OCGTs. So as I've indicated, we're burning fairly hard or especially this period when we've also had a considerable amount of partial load losses. To give an idea, in the last 7 days, we have burned 17 million liters of diesel between Gourikwa and Ankerlig, the two open cycle gas plants. I think the question on Koeberg I have answered. There was a bit of confusion between Kusile 1 and Koeberg 1. So I believe that that's been adequately addressed with. The Medupi 4 one, I've posted the answer in the chat box, but just to then indicate that there's not much change to the previous brief that we've given on this. Our senior executives have also engaged with GE, the OEM for the generators, and to see what we can do to fast track. Unfortunately, the generator needs to be completely remanufactured, which is a lengthy process through the manufacturing plants abroad. But we're looking at what we can do to accelerate also that process. Currently, Medupi 4 is still planned to return in August 2024, as per the plan that we've got currently on the table. I think I've dealt with the questions. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Thomas. Heeltemal in order. Mr. Dix, last one. And then hold on, Rudy, before you come in, Christian, I'm alerted that your hand is up, but I can't see it up here. So if you want to go, Christian Duplessis, go again, but I don't see your hand up. But just try and have a shot quickly, and I'll give you the last question.
Hi, Michael. Yes, my last question would just be the Premier of the Western Cape in the debate on SONA said that since this energy plan has been announced by the President more than 200 days ago, not a single watt of electricity has been added to the national power grid. I would just like to know whether that is in fact true, and if not, how many megawatts has been added to the grid. And then just secondly, this might be, as they say in Afrikaans, like a blonde oomblik, but the transmission, Eskom now being alone, standing alone on a transmission entity or being split, what would that help? Just in a nutshell, why is this so important? Thank you.
That's definitely a sensible piece of information that I'm sure the public would like to know, because as you remember, from the assumption of office, President Ramaphosa indicated that splitting it up has significant benefits, and I'm confident Mr. Dix could feel those ones. And I'm almost confident Mr. Dix would have an answer for your question as well regarding the EAP, the Energy Action Plan, since July last year. So, Mr. Dix, if you could take us to the close, please.
Thank you, Mr. Curran. Terence, we don't have the details yet on the breakdown between emergency and standard offer. Those, as I've indicated, those contracts are currently being negotiated and finalized. Once they're done, those announcements will be made by Eskom. Let's wait. What I've given you ahead is to show that thus far Eskom has received just over 400 megawatts for both the programs. Let's wait for the bounce back also. I think this would be an important announcement, and how the scheme will be repurposed, and the utilization and what's available. So again, I would rather not respond to that. It's a matter for National Treasury, and let's allow them to make those particular sets of announcements either in the budget speech or in the budget documents. I think that the SONA had given a clear indication that this is precisely what we as government would want to do. Chris, yes, it has been approved by NERSA. In actual fact, the standard offer and emergency, the standard offer, in actual fact, was put through as part of the MIPD application that was approved. NERSA made it very clear that it's approval for both the ability of Eskom to be able to recover its normal cost and on the standard offer, and this was clarified, and that's why Eskom has the ability to proceed on that basis. So this is NERSA approved. Any other additional procurement would of course have to have a conversation with NERSA, and Eskom would have to make fully clear on how it would recover the costs, and that conversations are currently happening both with the regulator and within Eskom itself, if there are any additional programs that would have to go out. Carol, yes, I don't have the precise date. I know that the minister had sent through that exemption from the new gen regulations. The new gen regulations was published many years ago. It's basically just give guidance around invest, build and a whole set of additional technologies. So easy to find. It's just the regulations for new generation, right? And they fall under the Electricity Regulatory Act, and they specify exactly what the new gen regs are. And in particular, new gen regs are quite important if one looks at the kind of interventions Eskom would want around, emergency procurement and a whole set of different areas, which is very different technologies and important technologies to be able to procure immediately onto it. And therefore, the new gen regs are considered as an important area to exempt from a process of, approvals and a whole set of different things, so that allows them, they can go to the market space. And of course, would have to still, there's another step that requires, of course, PFMA approval and of course for them to continue discussing with NERSA around how they can recover the cost, and if they can do that through the RC account. These are conversations that we would have to have. I just got a message saying that in actual fact this was approved on the 31st of January, right? So that went through on the 31st of January. William, yeah, no, not a blunt question at all. I mean, sorry, this is important. The separation and unbundling is quite critical, because we have seen the reform in the market space where you've seen we move away from a single buyer model, a vertically integrated system where Eskom traditionally has been the sole producer and buyer of electricity, and then it sells it off to the distributors. That single buyer model, of course, no longer holds, and therefore we have whole sets of different private sector players coming into the space, where Eskom itself is no longer just the sole producer generator of electricity. IPP programs, we have now potential over 9,000 megawatts of additional private sector investment that would realize in the next 2 to 3 years through the embedded generation program. These are important steps in ensuring a greater competition in the market space. Now, that requires for us to have an independent transmission company who is going to be responsible and important for purchasing this and of course, dispatching it to different distributors across it. An independent transmission entity is an end state. What will happen right now is, through an unbundling process where there would be a transmission entity that would be part of a holding company of Eskom, part of that reform program. And again, we've not given updates on the time frames for the announcement for the board, but the transmission license is an important step. Once that transmission license is there, it ensures that the transmission entity is able to perform its functions as an independent, entity, still under Eskom. Ideally, or what we're moving towards is that it become completely separate from Eskom, because it would have the responsibility of purchasing. It would have a central purchasing agency eventually, and it would, of course, as it does now, operate the system. It would decide on investments in strengthening the grid and expanding the transmission network, and a whole set of other important functions. But this is the first step, and that's why it's so important. Secondly, it also allows them to be able to raise as independent, entity capital to be able to ensure that its transmission development plans are being implemented. Eskom has estimated that there are it's about 150 billion rand of investment over the next 10 to 15 years to strengthen and upgrade the grid. And that's an important function that requires for that entity to be able to focus on. So its ability to operate independently, because of the shift in the way that our market has already happened and would happen, is going to be quite critical. It has to be independent as part of the unbundling process, and ensuring that we create a much more competitive market space. And that it has a particular function and role to play as a standalone company owned by the state. So that's the reason why it's become so critical. The third reason, of course, is that we not only have a generation constrained environment, enough megawatts, but we also now have a grid constrained environment. There is very little grid capacity, or next to nothing, in the northern, western, and the eastern Cape. And this is because investments have been lagging. And so we have to ensure that we expedite that as well. And this is also part of the Energy Action Plan to ensure that we support Eskom to be able to make sure that we do, get those parcels of lands. We do ensure that the investment flows, that monies that have been allocated through, for example, the Just Energy Transition Partnership and other funding sources do flow urgently, so that we do strengthen the grid there and allow for additional private sector investment to be able to get onto the grid. So that's the reason why transmission and the ability for it to operate as an independent and a standalone entity is going to be important. That process to get there is a transitional process that we've started some time back. And as I said, the National Transmission Company has been formed. We have to appoint a board. The next step is obtaining a license to operate, and there are 3 licenses that are required to operate. And that process, hopefully, NERSA will issue those licenses by the end of 31st of March in terms of our Energy Action Plan deadline. And as I said, Eskom has already issued, a public participation process for those licenses that are there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rudy. And I think it's coming at a good time to close, because I see the connection seems to be getting, it seems to be getting unstable. So I just want to close. I don't think you need to see me, my face to close the meeting. Please, I draw to your attention this power alert again. Firstly, I'd like to thank the members of the media for giving us your time this afternoon. It's quite clear to me that this kind of interaction is useful, and it's certainly something that that will allow us that conversation. And obviously in the week, you can speak to Mr. Baloy, you can speak to Peliswa, you can speak to myself. Josiah Pila is also here from GSAS, who's our project lead. And of any particular theme that you think we might pick up, but the principle, for those of you who may have joined a little bit later again, is that we do provide that update. And then secondly, colleagues, I think I'd be very amiss if I didn't extend to the Eskom team, Ntato and Mr. Sikonati, but particularly Thomas Conradi, who helped prepare Eskom's contribution today. Thomas, thank you so very much. It was very insightful for me. And Rudy Dix, thank you. You are really an asset to our journey here, because the information and understanding that you have is absolutely critical. And I just want to end to the members of the media to say, I can assure you that the entire machinery, Rudy and myself and Thomas here, you see us often now because we're at the apex of the situation. But the entire machinery of our Energy Crisis Committee, chaired by the DG, is really, really making great strides. We have had to improve. I'm sure I did hear that there have been units onto the grid through one of the interventions, namely the SADC pool. So, I'm confident we could assist Premier Wendy to see a few of those things. But obviously, there's no one who's saying that we've done as well as we would have liked to have done. Even our president has said that, and he's spoken very specifically to that's why we would need that catalytic minister to just focus on this particular area. So colleagues in the media, thank you for your time. I know some of you have another urgent appointment, and we are 1 minute over the time. But GSAS team, Josiah Pili and the crew, let's get the ball rolling and we sustain our momentum. Next week, obviously, we might not go into this level of detail because I know what most of you will be interested in next week, Thursday, Friday, but we'll see how the week goes. Obviously, our national budget is the big moment. So from my side, from Michael Curran, from GCIS, we wish you a lovely Friday afternoon. For those of you who will have a weekend, which is perhaps very few of us here, have a safe time, and please, let's make sure South Africans understand this power alert. Ntato is here. She can really be invited with her team to come and give some input on this. Maybe you can cover a bit of a feature on it. But this really does it's almost like that statement of every drop makes a difference. In this case, every unit makes a difference. On a lighter note, if I may say, that I have, for example, now been very diligent about switching my geyser off, because I was a bit skeptical a year or so back when Doretta was saying, but you switch your geyser off. I was shocked at the difference it makes on a monthly electricity bill. So I want to be a bit of a, what's the word? I want to be a proof of concept that it really did make a big difference. So please, if you could find ways to assist us in promoting this over and above those other platforms that the Eskom team are using. So demand management is critical. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much to the team, and we will see each other again on the journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.